Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation with former director of the National Economic Council, Gary Cohn. So at this signing ceremony the president did this week with China, he said,
I made a lot of bankers look very good.
The top 6 U.S. banks saved about $32 billion because of the tax cuts that you helped craft. This is analysis according to Bloomberg News. The hit on the tax law is that it is good for corporations, it's good for business, it's not good for the little guy. Why do you think this analysis is wrong? The president seems to be saying and applauding that he's helping out big banks.
Well, our tax bill is clearly working, which is great. We've made U.S. businesses competitive again with the rest of the world. We lowered the corporate tax rate to 21%. So we now have a corporate tax rate that is competitive with the rest of the world. Yes, we lowered corporate tax rates, and that in itself costs less than $100 billion a year to do that. But it stimulates huge economic growth. The businesses in the United States now can thrive, which means that they can grow, they can go out and hire people, which we've seen. We've seen record unemployment. We've seen record unemployment rates down to 3.5%. We've seen wage growth. We've seen 3% plus wage growth. And most importantly,
you put this all on the tax law.
We've seen a lot of it has to do with the tax law. It has to. We've seen higher end wage growth at the bottom pay scale than we have at the top. So we're seeing the incentives that we created in the tax law by lowering the corporate rate. We're seeing that happen. And that is happening in the last couple of years.
There's a whole debate about the contribution to the deficit, but I want to put that aside here because I want to focus in on something. I want to focus in on something, though, that is really resonating politically. And it is this broader argument that this country somehow is rigged to benefit the wealthy and disadvantage the poor. And you've even had Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. You've had Hank Paulson, former Treasury Secretary, former head of Goldman Sachs. I know you know him. They've said that they're all concerned about income inequality growing in this country. Are you concerned?
Of course I'm concerned.
But
we're all concerned.
Think in any way that there have been contributions to that through the tax law you helped write?
I think there have been contributions to the positive. I think if you look at the data, you'll see that we have grown wages at the bottom end of the pay scale faster than we've grown them at the top. It's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to attract more jobs back to the United States, put more people to work. And that's what we're seeing happening.
Michael Bloomberg says about this tax law, nearly all the money goes to people like me who don't need it. This is a guy who knows Wall Street, who is a billionaire. He's saying that the tax law is only advantaging people like him.
I'd love to know how it's advantaging him. I'd love to see that. Because at the end of the day, we have lowered rates. I'll agree that we've lowered rates. We have broadened the base, meaning that we make more of your income taxable. That's basic tax policy. Lower rates, broaden base, meaning you get rid of more of the loopholes that people have used to deduct from their income what they pay taxes on. We got rid of a lot of the loopholes, so people are having to pay more taxes. They're having to pay tax on more of their income. Yes, they're paying it at a little lower rate.
Are you going to endorse Michael Bloomberg, whose board I believe you sit on as part of one of his Bloomberg entities?
I sit on one of his emerging market boards. I guess it's a board.
But that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be voting for him.
It does not.
2 of the candidates who are also vying for the Democratic nomination, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, constantly come back to this idea of income inequality. They have proposed taxes on billionaires, taxes on financial transactions. Elizabeth Warren has specifically referred to that. People making over $50 million having an additional 2% tax. What would the impact of those policies be from your perspective?
Look, our tax system in the United States is very, very progressive. We have over 50% of the population today, workers, do not pay $1 of federal income tax. So if you're going to collect more revenue, which I'm not against, we have to collect more revenue, it's going to come from the top half of workers. And in fact, it's going to come from the top 10% of workers. That's where you can find the taxable income. I think that we will end up doing that. We will potentially need to do that. But these fangled plans that they're coming up with, we don't need to do things like that to collect more income from people. We have a basic tax system that works, and we can do some basic fundamental things if we need to collect more money. The question is, do we need to collect more money? You know, we look at spending and we look at revenue, and we don't talk about them in the same sentence. We collect taxes and then we spend. And Congress never thinks about how much money they have to spend. They just go spend. And so you wouldn't run your household like that. I wouldn't run my household like that. I would decide how much revenue I have and then how much I could spend.
But you're a Democrat.
Yes, I am.
Is there a single Democrat that you would consider voting for?
I'll consider voting for anyone. I vote on policy.
Even Elizabeth Warren, whose policy
I will consider voting for anyone, I said. I didn't say I would. I said I'd consider voting for them.
Well, that's evasive.
Yeah.
In pulling apart some of her proposals, you seem to be reflecting a lot of what Wall Street says, which is that there is deep concern over this focus on the financial community and corporations, et cetera. In this environment, is this enough that you see some of the people you know on Wall Street continuing to vote along lines of whatever the president is putting forward, even if they don't like some of his behavior, vote for him because of what he's doing for
that's a hypothetical question. I don't know. What I do know is the economy is really strong, and the Democrats haven't really come up with an idea how to help the economy get even stronger. So it's probably easier to talk about corporate greed and talk about Wall Street and talk about technology companies because they don't really have an answer for an economy that's growing 2.5% with 3.5% unemployment and 3% wage growth. I haven't heard their answer on that, except let's tax it to death.
So, as you said, you identify as a Democrat. You did have disagreements with the president on a number of things. I was there in Trump Tower the day of the Charlottesville reference, find people on both sides. I remember your face that day, and you were very public about some of your differences with the president. Will you vote for him?
Look, I'm very supportive of the president's economic policy. I'm very supportive of what he's done on deregulation. I haven't heard anyone who's come up with a better policy yet. Now, I just don't vote on the economy. I vote on a lot of the social issues as well. So, in many respects, I've got to balance both sides of that equation before I figure out who I'm going to vote for.
So you're leaving the door open?
I'm leaving the door open, but at this point, I don't have any intention not to vote for the president.
You are a frank guy. You're usually pretty direct.
Yeah.
Is there anyone around the president who can be direct with him right now? Is there anyone doing what you said you did when guiding him on some of these economic policies?
I don't know. I've been gone a year and a half. I'm sure there are people in there talking to the president.
When the president can say, look, I've gotten these tariffs that have helped me get this free trade deal with North America, these tariffs that have helped me get this phase 1 deal with China, doesn't that encourage the president's approach? One that you have said you have differed with him on.
It may encourage his approach, but he's also got advisors in there that I'm sure are telling him differences. I know that there are people in there. Secretary Mnuchin and I had a lot of conversations where we agreed on tariffs, and I'm sure the secretary's talking to the president about tariffs and what effect they're having and what effect they're not having.
Lastly, I want to ask you about a new book. I know you haven't read it. It's coming out, but there have been excerpts released that directly reference you, which is why I want to give you a chance to respond. The president is in this meeting accused of calling advisors dopes and babies and the like. Is the description of the president and his management style matching your experience?
I don't know which book you're referring to. As you said, I haven't read it, so I wouldn't know.
The management style of berating advisors.
Look, the president is, what you see on TV is exactly what you get in private with the president. The president is the same person behind closed doors as he is out in public, which is a unique feature. It's not like he turns it on or turns it off when he walks outside. So you've seen everything the president has. That's exactly what you see when you're in a private meeting with him.
All right. Gary Cohn, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with our political panel. Stay with us. We turn now to our political panel for some analysis. Jerry Seib's the executive Washington editor at the Wall Street Journal. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Ed O'Keefe is our chief political correspondent, and Weijia Jiang covers the White House for CBS News. Welcome to the table. Jerry, the president seems to have shifted his request for what he wants out of this Senate trial, or at least the Senate may not be giving him everything he wants. What's going on behind the scenes?
I think in the last few days there has been a feeling that's taken hold at the White House that's being conveyed to Senate Republicans that we would like to get this impeachment trial over with as fast as possible, as opposed to let's stretch it out, let's have this exonerate the president. I think there's now a real fear that the longer this goes on, the greater the risk of unexpected, unpleasant surprises. And Lev Parnas, who you talked about earlier, kind of illustrated that this week. Somebody comes in out of the blue during the middle of the process, starts saying things that make Republicans very nervous. Maybe that increases the chances that Senate Republicans will vote to call witnesses. That's not where the White House wants to go. So I think you're seeing the president pressure Senate Republicans, and you're seeing Senate Republicans having conversations this weekend about how can we speed this up and get to the finish line faster.
But Susan, you heard some of this with Senator Cornyn. I mean, he's talking about the gravity of the moment. That doesn't sound like something you put on fast forward.
You know, I thought it was remarkable what we saw over the last couple of days. We've been talking about impeachment since Inauguration Day. It's not a surprise that the president is being impeached, although maybe it's a surprise that it's over aid to Ukraine. But I thought that with the transmission of the articles of impeachment, with the arrival of the Chief Justice, with the senators signing the oath book, that we had a sense of of how the importance and the gravity of what is ahead. I'm not sure that's going to hold for an impeachment trial, especially with Alan Dershowitz on the president's defense team. But for at least a moment, it seemed like a different kind, a more serious exercise than it's seen before.
Weijia, you spoke to Alan Dershowitz, I know, in your reporting. He's got his own legal problems, but he's someone the public knows well from being on television. Ken Starr, people know him from the Clinton impeachment. What is behind this casting, if that's the right word, of these individuals?
You know, that baggage could follow them if you believe that the company you keep says something about you. But President Trump clearly doesn't care, because he really cares about the appearance of his legal team. And he thinks that Dershowitz and Starr, despite the other things that come along with them, will lend credibility to his case, along with, quote, great television ratings, according to an advisor to the White House. So the president thinks that they'll make for great TV to put on a show for who he believes are the real jurors in this case, not the senators, but the people watching at home.
Will it be great TV, Ed? I mean, this is something that is so solemn, so scripted. The senators can't even speak.
Right. And
is
I think
Mitch
there's only,
McConnell planning for great TV, or is he have something else in mind?
he's hoping for a dignified process. And if that means bad TV, so be it. And remember, there's only going to be like 4 camera angles in the room. We don't get to see the jurors necessarily during this trial. So you'll get no facial reactions from guys like Jim Inhofe or Chris Murphy. You know, it's just going to be sort of whoever's speaking and the Chief Justice for the most part. He'll get plenty of airtime. Look, McConnell has 4 priorities here over the course of the next few weeks. Manage the Senate and make sure it's a dignified process. But 3 other important things. He's got to manage the president and his expectations. He's got to manage the fact that 22 of his colleagues are up for re-election, and about 7 or 8 of them are in trickier contests than they'd like. And he has his own re-election back home. So he has to be seen as not only maintaining the decorum, but also keeping in the back of his mind, or in front of him, that this could be a factor 11 months from now in elections across the country.
You know what he's lucky with? John McCain is not in the Senate. Yeah. Can you imagine the 5th and 6th and 7th tours that McConnell would face if John McCain were still representing the state of Arizona? What does that mean Lindsey Graham would do? Does that mean Mitt Romney would feel more empowered to stand up in a serious way?
Yeah. And I would argue, too, that there could be somebody who emerges as, if not a McCain, some Republican that does step up and say, we do need to allow this to play out a little bit.
But we should remember, though, that the moment that would make for great TV, to your question, would be if John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, does in fact testify. That would be great TV. That would be a dramatic moment. And I think not getting to that point is a top goal of Mitch McConnell and the White House.
And while impeachment does not poll as a political win necessarily for Democrats, it's apparently helping fundraising at the RNC, Jerry.
Oh, it has, and it has since for several weeks now, and they've raised millions of dollars, and they've signed up lots of volunteers. People on the Trump team, people out in the country are unhappy about this, and they're voting with their feet and their dollars right now to some extent. By the way, one of the other groups that has to be worried about this is the 30 House Democrats who come from districts that Donald Trump won in 2016. And part of what the Republican machinery is doing is going after those people. They voted, except for one, for impeachment. Republicans would like to be sure they pay a price for that politically as well.
And the campaign is really capitalizing this as well, too. Sources say every time there's a twist and turn in this entire process, you see that being advertised to supporters, and they say there's a spike in the money that they're bringing in every time something significant happens. And so they're not shying away from this, and they're owning the fact that it's helping them financially. So we'll continue to see sort of this campaign for more money as this process goes on. on.
Is there concern in the White House about Lev Parnas, Rudy Giuliani's business associate? You've heard Senator Cornyn and others say not credible, not worth listening to.
There is concern because there's a recognition among sources who are being honest that even if he's not an official witness, he's already impacting this trial. Unless senators are completely tuned out, they are absorbing what he is saying, and they are seeing what he is dropping in these document dumps. So even though the president insists that he has no idea who Parnas is, the problem is Parnas has receipts.
And selfies.
Exactly. Not one, not two, but a whole collection that tells a story of two men who know each other over the course of years. And so the president has to add to his defense. He can't just say, I don't know who he is.
You know, I think great TV maybe, but I'm not sure it matters in the substance of the trial, in that there's not really dispute over what happened. Aid got delayed. The president wanted an investigation of Joe Biden by Ukraine. Now, there's an argument about whether it's an impeachable offense. There's an argument about the president's motives. But in a way, the facts are set. And I wonder if at the end of the day, when we get to Election Day, will this even matter? You know, this is part of the president. In a way, people have absorbed this idea already and made up their minds about whether they care.
Well, Ed, what about that? And what about some of the jurors who are running for office themselves?
Right. So 4, of course, are senators running for president: Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Michael Bennet, who spends most of his time in New Hampshire. All of them concede this is going to be a problem for them. All of them were on the trail again this weekend, trying to button things up, admitting to voters, I might not be back before caucus day. Sorry about that. They'll send their spouses. They'll send surrogates. They're establishing office hours at their campaign offices across New Hampshire and Iowa for people to come meet their surrogates and ask questions. And they will find ways from Washington, if need be, to campaign, whether that's holding Skype sessions with voters or calling into rallies and certainly doing television interviews. But they all understand they could be at a huge disadvantage. And if you look at the schedule in the coming days, who's spending most of their time in Iowa and New Hampshire? Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, who sit up there with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren at the top, especially in Iowa. So we've never seen anything like this, and it will really sort of test whether being there and the face time that voters in these early states crave is a factor, or whether those 4 senators have done enough already to bank away goodwill and votes.
And Jerry, what do you make, though, of the argument that Democrats need to be campaigning on issues like health care? Speaker Pelosi says, how do you respond to what Gary Cohn laid out, which was it's hard to run against a strong economy?
Yeah.
How do you turn back to the subject?
Well, first of all, I thought it was very instructive that there was almost no discussion of impeachment in the debate the Democrats had this week. They're not eager to talk about this out in the country. Second of all, I think Gary Cohn made a really good point. Where's the conversation in the Democratic primary dialogue about how to create jobs and what the role of the private sector is in creating jobs? You listen in vain. There's no discussion of that. And that's the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren effect on the field. But you wonder whether that's really resonating with the moderates in the party, because they would like to hear some conversation about job creation and good wages, and they're not hearing it.
The person talking about that is Mike Bloomberg, who is not even competing in Iowa, and who I think maybe somebody we're not talking about enough in terms of the possibility he could emerge as a contender.
All right. Well, thanks to all of you. We will be right back in a moment. There is a lot of news on the Supreme Court beat this week, so who better to bring in for some analysis than our own chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford. Jan, it's good to have you here. You know the court very well, and John Roberts, Chief Justice, we don't hear from him very often. He will now be at the center of the Senate impeachment trial. How is he going to shape this?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we may not hear very much from him at all during this trial, because his role in this trial is completely different than what you think of as the role of a judge. And in a sense, he doesn't really have a lot of power. The Senate sets the rules, so they have the first word, and they can overturn any of his rulings by a majority vote. So they have the last word. So John Roberts is going to be in this really kind of weird position where he may rule on some related matters or issues, but then the Senate could overrule him if it disagrees.
And now he's stepping into one of the most politically heated partisan environments. Staying above that is going to be tough.
It'll be very tough, and that's why a lot of people said this is a nightmare for the Chief Justice, but it's also an opportunity, because it's an opportunity for him to show in this hyper-partisan environment of the Senate that he is above politics, that he is neutral, that he's not taking one side or the other. So he's going to go there as the face of the Supreme Court and potentially see that as an opportunity to remind the American people that judges are above politics. That is his opportunity, and that is also his challenge.
I want to ask you about something else that seemingly was historic this week. Both houses of the Virginia legislature voted to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, a lot of people would say, wait, isn't that already law that you have to treat men and women equally? But actually, this proposal was never amended to the Constitution. You need 38 states, 3/4 of the country to actually go ahead and do it. Why has that benchmark? Why has this country never reached it and gone ahead and amended this in the Constitution?
Well, I mean, that's the great question, right? Because on the surface, it seems, really straightforward. Of course, women should be treated equally in the workplace. Of course, women should get the same kind of equal access that men would. And that was the way it was viewed in 1972. When Congress, with the broad support, bipartisan supermajority of 2/3, approved that resolution and sent it to the states to ratify. 3/4 of the states needed to ratify it, 38 states, and it gave the states a deadline of 7 years to do so. Everyone thought it's going to happen. 30 states passed it within the first year. 5 more got on board pretty soon after that, and then it ground to a halt. And the reason is conservatives started kind of taking issue with certain things, including the issue of abortion. The Supreme Court ruled in Roe versus Wade in 1973 that women had a constitutional right to abortion. And then it occurred to certain activists that this ERA could further enshrine abortion rights in the Constitution. So it became controversial. And there were other issues that activists pointed out on the right that would raise concerns potentially for women.
And you said something important there, a 7-year deadline. So this means it's expired.
Congress,
so is this just symbolic?
Potentially, yes. After this expired in 1979, Congress tried to extend it to 1982 just to give the states more time, and no states jumped at it. So it got stuck at 35. Virginia now ostensibly would be the 38th state because we've had 2 other states recently also approve it. And the House later this month is going to take up a resolution to take out that deadline from the original amendment. But that's entirely questionable whether that's constitutional. Congress passed that in 1972 with 2/3 vote. And now to say that they're going to change it with a simple majority, the courts, I think it's pretty suspect. And they're going to have a huge legal battle on that potentially going back to John Roberts could make its way to the Supreme Court.
And on to your desk. Jan Crawford, thank you very much. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.